Hello guys, my name is Mutsawa Shimbayo. I'm a lecturer in the Management, Accounting and Finance Department, and today I'm going to be taking through the revision videos for the mid-year exams, specifically the CTA Level 1 paper. I'm going to discuss with you today specifically required D, which read discuss with supporting calculations whether PTGS should purchase the sachet packing line is proposed by the production team, giving us a total of 25 marks. So today I'm going to discuss with you the interpretation of the required, and from there we are going to discuss some of the common mistakes that we noted when we were marking these exams, and last but not least discuss or try to discuss some of the possible causes why some of these mistakes we noted happened. So I'll start off with the interpretation of the required. So the required wanted you or expected you to discuss or identify the most appropriate tool to use in making the decision whether to purchase the sachet packing line or not purchase the sachet packaging line. So discuss with supporting calculation. It now means we're supposed to have some sort of calculation, and to this extent supporting calculations were now calculated applying the net present value as a tool to help us making the decision. So any discussion that you had was supposed to be centered around the NPV calculation that you had calculated to earn you a total of 25 marks. So some of the common errors that we noted were identification of the wrong tool. So this required did not tell you discuss with supporting NPV calculations whether we should whether we should purchase the packaging line or not. It only wanted you to make a decision. So some students identified the incorrect tool for decision making. So for example, some students used the break-even analysis. Some students even used the ABC costing method as a tool to help us decide whether we should purchase the packaging line or not purchase, which was inappropriate for the decision that we're trying to make. Second of all, another mistake that we noted was students were not even providing the supporting calculations that were specifically triggered in the required. So no calculations were provided, but rather a discussion of the information that they were supposed to calculate. So as an example, so some students were discussing whether sales were a relevant cost or not a relevant cost in making the decision. For example, the feasibility studies costs that were incurred in year 0 are irrelevant in decision making, instead of inputting information in an NPV calculation. Another mistake that we noted was input of figures in the incorrect accounting period. So for example, the initial costs that were required, that is purchase of the machinery, the feasibility study costs, were incurred now, which is in year 0, but some students put those figures or those amounts in year 1, making the NPV calculation incorrect. Another error that we noted, and this is a huge error or a huge mistake that we noted, was the incorrect application of tax principles. So students correctly identified that tax is a relevant cash flow in making this decision, but in terms of now computing the tax that was in line with this specific decision, students used incorrect tax principles. So we'll discuss further what were some of the possible reasons for some of these errors. So as an example, identification of the wrong tool. A possible reason is failure to interpret the required. So if you had missed the required, you were definitely not going to identify the correct tool to enable you to make that decision. And number two, a possible reason was cramming. So if your students were cramming the capital budgeting tool, that is cramming the mechanics without mastering how each tool is used in the decision-making process is part of investment appraisal. So you all know what what the net present value method, how it works, but some students did not demonstrate an understanding of how the method is used in making a decision. We noted that for some students, they were cramming instead of demonstrating their understanding of how the tool works. And another possible error, and another possible reason was in relation to inputting figures in the incorrect period, was likely overlooking by some students on the accounting period, maybe likely due to exam pressure. So you can't, maybe by the time you were writing that specific required, you didn't have enough time, or your time was limited. So you were not extra careful when you were now putting those figures. It could be a possible cause of the error. And last but not least, in a connection with the incorrect application of the tax principles, I think, or a possible reason could be, maybe students have not yet mastered their tax principles, especially on the taxation of corporates. Remember, PTGS is a corporate entity, as in the PTGS is a taxpayer on itself. So I think students, by the time they wrote the exam, might not have mastered corporate tax, how the capital allowances are calculated, how they affect the tax of PTGS. Is it gross income? Is it an allowable deduction? Do you have recoupment? For example, the machinery that was sold in year 4, were we going to have a recoupment or consequences as a result of us selling the asset? What other tax considerations should you have thought of when we were computing these calculations to enable us to make a decision whether we should purchase the packaging line or not purchase the packaging line? So this is a discussion centered around the common errors and what could have caused the common errors. So a take-home point is, make sure when you're studying capital investment appraisal, make sure you have an understanding of the tool, how it operates, how does it aid in decision making, so that when it comes to you demonstrating whether you know the most appropriate tool to use when you're making so and so decision, you are able to demonstrate to the examiner that you know which tool applies to a specific decision. And also, when you take time to go through the exam reports after you've gotten your scripts, go through the exam scenario, required solutions, recalculate, for example, and then you compare your solution with the suggested solution. Even after going through the specific video, if you feel you have any further questions, you can still come through and we can discuss. So thank you for taking your time to go through this video. See you next time.